Yeah, I'm a political scientist and I am a student in political philosophy as well. I'm just telling that because I'm writing a master proof or thesis on the UN drug treaties. And then I'm looking at that with the thought of Amartya Sen in relation with this idea of justice. Aside of that, I'm writing blogs as well about cannabis as a recreational drug and as a medicinal drug. I interviewed a lot of people, Professor Lester Greenspoon, for example, also Professor Ethan Nadelman, who was actually the executive director of DPA, Drug Policy Alliance in America, in the United States. Today I'm talking to you about the stigmatization of cannabis users. What I want to do is first give you a little definition of what is stigmatization, what stigmatization is in relation with cannabis use, and also what is stigmatization in Belgium, how does that occur. So first, the stigmatization of cannabis users. Stigmatization is a process whereby a group of people is negatively labeled, convicted and excluded. This occurs on the basis of deviating common features and/or behaviors that call for fear or aversion. Drug users, homeless people, Jews, blacks, psychiatric patients, they all are groups that have a stigma on them. A stigma is a powerful negative social stamp. It profoundly influences the people are seen and see themselves as well. We distinguish actually three different types of stigma. The first one is maybe the most known, is a public stigma. It's a collective name for the stigmatization from society. The second one is a self-stigma or internalized stigma. The stigmatized fits the assumed negative judgments of others to themselves and believes them. And then the third one is a structural stigma. That is when the stigma anchored in culture, law and regulation. In relation to drug use, we see that the three different types of stigma play an important role. Also, we must remember that stigmatization often leads to discrimination and/or criminalization. So, now look at the stigmatization in relation to drugs and cannabis use. When we look at drugs, some drugs are legal and others are not. But why? We could assume that this is due to the harmful effects that drug use entails, but that is absolutely not the case. If you want more information about this, you should read Professor David Nutt's book, Drug Without the Hot Air, Minimizing the Harms of Legal and Illegal Drugs. The different way that drugs are approached to the different drugs can be traced historically and is largely the result of the xenophobic and socio-economic climate that exists in the 19th and early 20th century. During this period, drug laws developed which depicted drug users of foreign origin, immigrants actually. For example, we had the Chinese opium users or later the Mexican marijuana users. By the way, it is striking that in the 1930s, when cannabis is becoming increasingly associated with Mexican immigrants, its name will change within American society. Until then, cannabis was known as cannabis, a well-known drug that could be found in pharmacy in various forms and for various indications. But that changed. Then another thing, an important thing that occurs was that the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was founded in the 1930s under the leadership of Harry Anslinger. He was a known racist and he committed to spreading the most terrible marijuana stories. Before the American Congress, he testified one day, most marijuana smokers are Negroes, Hispanics, jazz musicians and entertainers. Their satanic music is driven by marijuana. And marijuana smoking by white women makes them want to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers and others. It is a drug that causes insanity, criminality and death. It is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. At the same time, an image was created that the use of drugs such as cannabis, other than for medical reasons, would affect social order within society. undermining the bourgeois values of thrift, self-denial, and future orientation, and rejecting conventional middle-class norms regarding class, gender, and sexuality. Of course, spreading such stories leads to stigmatization of cannabis use. Because the use of cannabis was mainly associated with those marginal groups, there was soon a latent social consensus that supported repressive policies. Anslinger could easily spread his story without critical investigation in the newspapers, magazines, radio, and television. In addition, Anslinger also played an important role in the first UN International Drug Treaty that came in 1961. It is an international drug treaty approved by more than 180 countries. The tone of that treaty was stigmatizing in nature. On the one hand, it is interesting to note that the preamble of the treaty states that drugs and drug addiction are a serious evil for the individual and are a threat to society, and that the international community has a duty to fight it because it is a fraud. That's an undesirable thing, with social and economic danger to humanity. Of course, this kind of language is very stigmatizing because it defines drug users and drug misusers as a hazard, as a danger for society. On the other hand, we note that tobacco, which causes many deadly victims, and alcohol, which has many negative consequences not only for the user, but also for society, are not included in the text and are released from stigmatization and criminalization. Because of that, some authors are calling this approach an indication for drugs apartheid. Now, the consequences of stigmatization of cannabis users cannot be minimized. The media still plays a major role today for spreading the stigma. They keep a series of myths alive that the scientific world already abandoned. For example, that cannabis is heavily addictive, or cannabis users become crazy or stupid or violent. At the same time, this kind of narrative dehumanizes the user, by which public opinion and policymakers seem to find a way to legitimize the transformation of public stigma into repressive policies. Stigmatization and repression often go hand in hand. At the same time, the harmful consequences and fatal victims of alcohol and prescription drugs are widely forgotten in the media. Also, about that you can find figures in the book of Professor David Nutt. The criminalization of the cannabis users causes extra stigmatization, in which the racial orientation is striking. Many more blacks and other colored people are targeted, arrested, fined, and imprisoned than whites. And that is not because blacks and others, colored people, use more cannabis than whites. Most studies indicate that whites and blacks use approximately as many cannabis. Michelle Alexander, who is a professor of law, calls drug laws, which imprisons many blacks and Latinos, the new Jim Crow. The Jim Crow laws were state and local laws enforcing racial segregation in the southern United States. The stigma causes further marginalization of the users, sentenced persons, and they fall outside the mainstream society and economy. The prohibition regime is certainly a way to control deviant social groups located at the bottom of society. So now a few words about the stigmatization of cannabis users in Belgium. In Belgium, cannabis use is illegal. Cannabis users can be fined or possibly imprisoned when they are recidivist. Also in Belgium, cannabis users are stigmatized. The wildest stories are told about them, so cannabis users often use in secret, which is not so funny, I've been told. Imagine that when you drink your next beer or wine, you must always look around because the police might arrest you. How would you feel? Or you go out and buy some alcohol on the street without quality control because there are no shops, and then you got blind after you drank it. Who is to blame? Summer will bring music festivals in Belgium. At some time, maybe good weather as well. At some of them, cannabis users are targeted, and when they get caught by the police with cannabis, they have to hand over their cannabis and pay a fine immediately. At the same time, one can drink without any problem alcohol at the same location. Sometimes youngsters get searched for drugs at school by the police. Is this a good thing? Would you like that to happen to your kid? Many people want cannabis to be legalized, but do not dare to say it out loud because of social and family pressure. How can a fair public or political debate be conducted if the users are never heard because they are afraid of possible reprisals? This imposed silence arises with and is a result of the stigma. The silence is also not heard by so-called progressive political parties who at the same time make little effort to urge a debate. In Belgium we have an extreme right political party, the N-VA. Well, some will say it is a right party. And the mayor of Antwerp, Bart de Wever, sent on daily basis 4 people without papers that are caught dealing drugs out of Belgium. With a party like the N-VA, stigmatization and repressive policy will only grow. Unfortunately, there is no other party that dares to hold another view in Flemish Belgium. Not even the Liberals, nor the Green. So my concluding remark, to really accept others means you accept them with their entire otherness, even when they have habits that you do not have or do not like. If we really want to call our society a liberal and pluralistic democracy, it is time to bring this idea in practice. Thank you.